between my age of 24 and 27. I went from being the first employee to a founder to managing director of EMEA when I came home and opened a Dublin office for them. We grew the company to about 120 people. It was not easy being a woman in blockchain in 2016, 2017, 2018. The gap is widening between great reps and good reps because of AI.
You arrive in Wayflyer in 2022. They've just achieved a $1.6 billion valuation. You walk in the door to be the director of enablement. What do you find?
Meet Emma Walker. Emma was the second employee at Waxman at 23, where she rose to run its EMEA business as they scaled to 120 people over 4 years. In this episode, we reflect on that extraordinary rise and the journey that saw Emma nominated for the Image Business Technology Woman of the Year, recognised in the Sunday Times 30 Under 30, and become one of the most respected enablement leaders inside hyper-growth companies today. She also breaks down what she learned from working inside Irish success stories like Wayflyer, why leaders still get AI and enablement wrong, and what pushed her to step out and start her own business. This episode is full of hard-earned lessons on leadership, performance, and building something of your own.
Emma Walker, welcome to the Revenue Room.
Thanks very much. Ross Keating.
Thanks for being guest number 2.
I appreciate it.
You just told me off camera that you got your first tattoo last week.
We're going straight into the good stuff.
We're going straight into the good stuff. Tell us about that.
I think what I was saying to Ross, if anyone knows me, it's quite off-brand. I don't think people will be putting a bet on that one. But yeah, I got a small little tattoo on my arm here. It says Todo Pasa, which is everything passes. Spent a lot of time in Spain, feel very attached to Spanish culture, knew I wanted something Spanish. And yeah, just realised that, like, whether personally or professionally, I think there's been a lot of moments where I've taken a lot of risks in my life so far. And yeah, everything has passed, worked out, figured it out. And I'd like to keep living my life that way. So I just said, why not make it that permanent? Put it on the arm, tell myself every day. So yeah, very off-brand, but maybe this is my new me.
Maybe it is. I am interested though in everything passes, because as I was doing research on your career, what's very evident is that you've had a very varied career in a short space of time, and you've taken on lots of exciting but very challenging roles as well. Where does that mindset come from?
I think when you reach a certain age, hindsight's great because you get an opportunity and chance to actually really think about this. I think when you're making those decisions and you're making those challenging choices and you're joining those organizations, I think at the time you just hustle through. And I think that's the first piece with the mindset. I grew up in a family where we just hustled. I didn't know anything other than you're either working or you're resting. And rest definitely took a back seat. And so when I left college and when I started working and then when I went through jobs, all I knew was just work your ass off, you know? I think the second thing that I did not realize at the time during all of these different career paths that I now know is that my risk tolerance is pretty high when it comes to business and myself. And I don't think it's that I'm afraid of failure. I think I've just learned to really back myself a lot. I also grew up in a family where I wasn't told how great I am all the time, but I was told, just do it. Like, everything will work out. Everything passes. And so I've just learned to back myself. If I make a choice to do something different, try a different career, try a different role, try a different company, back yourself that you'll figure it out and trust yourself that it'll either work or it won't, and you'll be fine either way. And so I think putting work ethic meets, I suppose, confidence that I'll be fine. I made some pretty great choices, and some that I loved and some that maybe I didn't love as much, but an exciting career. Has
that mindset around work ethic and maybe the importance of rest, has that changed over the years?
Oh yeah. I think you can only hustle for so long. And it's interesting, so many people have said to me, oh, you've started your own business. God, that must be so challenging. Or that's a really tough one, right? And I'm like, actually, for me, with my work ethic, it's probably the best thing I could have done, because I have a lot more control over how much I rest and how much I work. I have so much more control over how I spend my time, my boundaries and all of that. So starting a business has helped me because, there's definitely been times in my career where the work ethic has been exceptionally helpful to succeeding. But I've burnt out a couple of times, so again, everything passes. This is going to be the motto of today.
So you left college, you did a couple of PR roles, and then in 2016 you joined Waxman.
Yeah.
And you had a wild ride there.
Do you know what? I call that the luckiest chapter of my life, which I was just so bloody lucky. So I went to New York with my now husband. Also, thankfully, that worked out. And I applied to a job in Indeed. And it was just a plain old PR account executive role at an agency. And I went and I did the interview, and I learned quite quickly into the interview that it was just the founder, and he just started the business 2 months before. And I got offered the job, and I remember ringing my mum outside Wall Street area, and I said, like, oh, this is mad, should I do this? And she was like, again, like, go for it, why not? And it completely altered my career. I went from being a 23-year-old PR professional in New York to someone who hires people, has to let people go, navigate legal, navigate accounting, business development. I became a business owner. And over the course of 4 years, I went from being the first employee to a founder to managing director of EMEA when I came home and opened a Dublin office for them, then supported in our Asia expansion. We grew the company to about 120 people between my age of 24 and 27. I went from being an individual contributor to managing managers, and then to managing managers of managers. And I learned an incredible amount about how technology works and how emerging technology works, because Waxman, for anyone who doesn't know, at the time was a communications agency for emerging tech, and specialised quite heavily in blockchain and cryptocurrency. And in 2016, 2017, as you can imagine, boom, boom, boom at the time. It's now evolved and it still exists, and it's one of the largest PR agencies in Dublin, and one of a leader in blockchain and crypto globally. But it's moved out of just PR and comms, and it's moved into market advisory and consulting. But I learned a lot about the perceptions of emerging tech, how to educate people on what new technology can do, while also learning how to grow a business. So it was luckiest chapter of my life, and it completely set me up for everything I've done after.
Before we get into what you learned, I was a buffoon at 24. There's no way that you could have put me into a role where I was managing a business. What were you like at 24, 25?
I think I had my 30s and my 20s, and I think I'm having my 20s and my 30s. I think I had a lot of gratitude, I think, at that age. I think I constantly would wake up every day being like, God, I'm so grateful to have this opportunity. And I'd also gone through a couple of jobs before that where I'd felt maybe I was in a swim lane. I was hyper ambitious in my early 20s, and I felt kind of like, I don't know what the word is, but maybe limited in what I could achieve. And so when this opportunity emerged where I just had to run with it, I think I was very grateful for it. And I think gratitude for the opportunity like pushed me on. I worked really hard. We're recording this in Dublin here, and right around the corner from here is where the first Waxman office in Dublin was. And so coming around here definitely brought a lot of memories back. A lot of 10 p.m. taxis on the way home. A lot of 7 a.m. signing into the office. Like, it was hard. Like, it was a 4-year window of working really, really hard. But pair that with gratitude and you get a lot of hustle.
You mentioned learnings around disruptive tech. You mentioned learnings around leadership. You do a lot of work with new leaders now. When you look back at 24, 25, 26-year-old Emma, what were you learning?
A couple of things come to mind. First, and leadership is super lonely, like really lonely. And I think if you don't feel a little bit lonely as a leader, I think you're potentially in a place where you're trying to be too close or too friendly with everyone. I met some incredible people. I hired some incredible people, and I'm really proud of who they are and the relationships I built with them, and I still have them today. But you're still alone with your decisions. Who you're hiring, who might not work out. When a client, I remember there was times when clients hadn't paid on time, and I was paying people's salaries out of my savings, right? It was like early scrappy culture. So leadership is lonely. That's like the first thing that I think I was learning at the time. And I think the second thing that I was learning at the time was, like, there's no right or wrong decision on anything. And I now, with hindsight, can look back and say, I just made the best decision I could make at any given point in that 4-year window, because I had never done this before. And I think I learned pretty quickly that you're going to make some bad decisions and you're going to make some great decisions, but you're just making the best decision you can at the time. So they're two big learnings for me from my time at Waxman, just around leadership in general.
Yeah. In some ways I can relate. I didn't have quite the same experience that you did, but, you know, at the age of 26, 27, I was shoved into a boardroom with seasoned investors and well-known CEOs running a commercial business in a startup, and I was definitely a deer in headlights.
Yeah.
And I definitely had probably 5 to 10 years worth of learnings in 1 or 2 years. It sounds like you had, you know, that maybe times 2 or times 3. So what is different now about how you handle leadership or how you make decisions versus what you were doing back then?
I think I know myself a lot better now. And I think if I was to give any advice to anyone who is moving into leadership, it's one, know yourself, right? Know your strengths, know your weaknesses, know your biases, know the things that are gonna trigger you. The second thing is, if I'm ever leading or managing anyone now, or since Waxman, any teams I've managed, I think we underestimate the importance of knowing the people you manage. When I'm coaching and training leaders now, I'm surprised by the quantity of statements like, I think, I guess, what I'm assuming. And it's like, no, like, get to know them, understand how they tick, figure it out, right? Because
How do you get to know people?
intention. I think people leave it to, oh sure, look, when I go for a beer with them here, we'll chat about this, but I think weeks and days go by and I think we need intention. And so I do a lot of work with leaders on, well, what are the things that you should know about somebody that are going to help you manage them effectively? And then how do you actually engage and craft really intentional conversations with them around that? And how do you read the person in front of you as you do that, with knowing how much you can push and prod to go deeper? Because some people are going to be more closed off than others. But the best leaders, it doesn't matter if you're leading for 20 years or leading for 6 months, the best leaders are the ones that have intentional approaches to how they do that. And I think at times I did that quite naturally in Waxman, and I learned a lot of it. And I think at times I didn't, and I now have probably regrets that if I had have known a little bit more about that person, I probably could have done more for them, or I could have got more out of them. So there are two things that, like, completely know yourself and then know your team. And if we've time for one more, the last one is, and you played a big role when I got to know you, what, about 3-4 years ago, you talked about this as well, and I was like, that's the perfect way to explain it. I think as a leader, you just have to have a really beautiful operating system. You talk about that as well in all the work you've done and we've done together. But the best leaders are the ones that, even if things go wrong or fires are happening, you keep your operating system in place. You don't shake up the basics, right? And you run your team as you should run your team, and you let the fire come in, but it doesn't pull the whole house down. So I think back to my time at Waxman, and I was maybe building a leadership playbook without knowing it, and I just stuck to my guns on it. And fires happened, clients let us go, people left, Bitcoin dropped 300% at any given point. And you got to keep your operating system in place.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in the operating system, or in frameworks, as you know, as well. And that having that level of structure actually gives your team to be the opportunity to be autonomous, you know, within the roles. And not only that, does that give you the right motion, but it creates trust and allows team members to be creative within that structure as well. So you have this fantastic journey in Waxman. Tell us then about Block W.
Yeah. So for anyone who, I say maybe a lot of people don't know what Block W is. So Block W was a community that was created specifically for women within the blockchain industry in Ireland. Blockchain by nature as a technology was heavily male dominated. Most new emerging technologies are. And this, bear in mind, this is 2018, 2019. And a lot of effort has gone in to get women into technology, whether it's in emerging tech like blockchain or it's in, you know, more standard STEM. The challenge, I think, for a lot of women is that when you're within that, the culture and the system that you're in now is still heavily male dominated. So when I say we, myself and 5 or 6 other women in Ireland who worked in blockchain at the time, we spotted an opportunity to create a community that would demystify blockchain for women and men. We had a lot of male leaders too, or members too. but also help create a space to ask the most basic question to the most complex question. Learn how blockchain was transforming different industries. Understand how you can get more involved, or if you want a career in blockchain. So we started it, 6 women around a room, all in different areas. I was in the startup space. We had people in government. We had people within education. We had people within policy. And we decided, what if in Ireland we hold 6 week, every 8 weeks, hold events. We bring in guest speakers and we create a space for people just to come together. And so I did it for about 2 years after founding it with the other women. And then when I left Waxman, and I left kind of blockchain behind, so I left BlockW as well. But they're still going very strong today. And it's something I'm really proud of. It was not easy being a woman in blockchain in 2016, 2017, 2018. There wasn't many of us, so I was glad I did it.
What are you most proud of?
In life?
No, what are you most... I mean, what you've described there, you know, is quite powerful. And, you know, you've said it in quite a casual way that you created a community that was primarily focused on supporting and educating women in a very disruptive space. I'm just interested, you know, what were the highlights? What are you most proud of from that time?
When I was in Waxman, we were largely female dominated because PR and comms is a female dominated industry, and we had a lot of men join us too. What I'm most proud of is by creating BlockW and by the work that we did there, yes, did we have a lot of impact on everyone within my wider circle, people I got a chance to meet and engage with. But I'm hoping the biggest impact I have was actually the people I sourced and hired into Waxman, who were communications professionals, didn't know anything about blockchain, and probably thinking, what am I doing? I'm just going to trust this person. I'm going to trust Emma, and I'm going to run with this. I'm getting a good energy from her. 6 or 7 of those that joined me in at junior roles are now leading Waxman in Dublin and globally. And I would like to think that the work of BlockW wasn't, they didn't happen in silo. I think that you have to create opportunity and space for women to excel in any technology. And there's 4 or 5 or 6 women in Waxman now who are leading the roost under Liam and David and the team that are still there. And I'm really, really proud of them. And I'm really proud of that they found a place in their career to be a woman within a technology and stay. Because that was the whole reason BlockW was created. The women stay in a technology. They don't leave because they're not comfortable or happy.
Yeah, it's quite an impact. And it's around the time that you were named in the 30 under 30, the Sunday Times. You were nominated for Image Business Woman of the Year in the technology category, and you got a special recognition for the Early Career Awards. What was that like?
Now, I know it sounds silly. Now I'm should I have been surprised? Because I do now actually acknowledge what I did in my early part of my career. At the time, I was like, why am I in these situations? Lovely story. I was very, very fortunate, as I said, to have a wonderful team in Dublin and Waxman. And when I told them I was finishing up and I was leaving, a number of them decided to sit down and nominate me for a lot of things. Now, look, 30 under 30 isn't a nomination process, and I feel very privileged to have been identified by the Sunday Independent and selected for that. But all the rest were nominated. You put in and you have to apply. And so the thing that probably surprised me the most is not that maybe I got them, but the fact that a group of people, knowing I was finishing up and leaving and walking away from the business, that they said, we'd like to thank you by nominating you for that. So that was I won't cry on this podcast, but there was a few tears about that one.
Well, it speaks to a very tangible culture. I mean, you've just spoken a moment ago about intentional leadership and getting to know your team and getting to know the people that you work with. That was clearly something that you managed to do over those number of years.
Yeah. And I know we're going to get into AI shortly, but culture is something that I think that we have to protect, and we have to be really intentional around, especially as technology is changing. But I'm very, very, very proud of what I created. And we had a couple of mottos, actually. For anyone who doesn't know the PR industry, it can be quite cutthroat. Maybe not Mad Men, but it can be quite cutthroat. And so I was 24, 25 with an office in Dublin. 25, 24-year-olds didn't open PR agencies in Dublin. It just wasn't a thing, right? And so we decided, myself and the first couple of employees, that we wanted to create a culture that was entirely different to anything else. And we had a couple of mottos. The first one for me was like, age doesn't matter, action does. I was like, I don't really care what age you are. I don't care what experience you've had. If you come in here and you work hard and you are coachable, I can depend on you, and you're willing to get better, action's what matters. The second one was, don't leave your shit at the door. I think the culture is where we expect people to come in and be robots and leave all their personal life behind. Like, we're humans. Work is not everything. Bring everything with you. We'll navigate it together, and you be loyal to me and I'll be loyal to you. And they're two. And the final one, I wanted that everyone that worked for me learned how to start and run an agency, because what if they're the next one to be called on at 24 years old and have to figure this out? So we were hyper transparent about how we ran the business, hyper transparent about how we make decisions, within reason, obviously. So they're kind of the mottos behind the culture I created. And so, yeah, I'm really proud of that.
Yeah. I think there's some timeless mottos as well there, right? Obviously you've touched on AI and we'll get into it, but organizations are changing fast, and the need, I think a lot, what I'm seeing in a lot of enterprise organizations is this reintroduction of performance culture into organizations, very metric driven approaches, and there's lots of reasons for that, a lot of them macro reasons, but in some cases leaders can deprioritize organizational culture as a result.
Yeah.
And finding a marriage between those two things is a real challenge.
Yeah, and if I can jump on that, in my view, there's a difference between creating a performance culture and using performance psychology to influence a culture. And what I mean by that is, performance culture in sales is typically like metric. But like, that's not how performance psychology works. And so, yeah, like when we get into my enablement world, let's go back to that.
Well, let's go there. Tell us more about that performance psychology. What do you mean by performance psychology and performance culture being different?
So, the way humans work, when we think about salespeople need a number of different things to be able to successfully navigate targets, navigate their role. If it was simple as, here is the numbers you need to hit, and here is the moments in any given week where I'm going to go and I'm going to hold these numbers over your head and I'm going to say, and I'm going to hold you accountable to that, then my God, we would have thousands of businesses around the world and thousands of revenue organizations who, if that worked by itself, I mean, we'd be laughing, right? So when I hear a lot around like performance culture, bringing metrics to the forefront, really driving it, holding people accountable, it has to be paired with the understanding of what motivates individuals. So like, there's two types of motivations. One is extrinsic and one is intrinsic. Extrinsic, we're motivated by, if I do this task today, I'm going to get a reward at the end. I consider that to be metrics culture. If I put these inputs in, I'm going to book a meeting. If I do this today, I'm likely to hit my target tomorrow. The reality is, though, is that not all of us are motivated that way. So let's go to intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is when we're motivated to do something purely for the joy of doing it. And every human being out there has a different intrinsic motivator. My intrinsic motivator is, I want my work to impact the success of other people. I love seeing something I do helping someone else succeed. Other people could have an intrinsic motivator if they want to be challenged and stretched. Other people might want to learn frequently every day. So every single person has a different intrinsic motivator. So when you're building a sales or performance culture, you have to create opportunities for people every week or every day to lean into an intrinsic. And that's where you have to balance the two. Yes, have your numbers. Yes, make sure people are accountable. But where is the joy in any given day within a sales function? The learning, the stretching, the challenging, the impact. And it's only when those two things are combined do I think that you have a performance culture.
And so imagine that there's a sales leader listening, and they may be under pressure from all angles. They may have quota pressure. They may be under pressure to reduce costs and think about substituting AI in where people were previously. How do I create a culture where my team are intrinsically motivated, where I'm also dealing with all these other pressures?
Yeah, great question. I think they first have to start with the metrics piece. And I think they have to lay that foundation. We talked about operating system. We talked about it, making sure that there's a rhythm within the sales org. So I'm not trying to say that you start on the second. You need to start on the first. Do managers have clarity and do reps have clarity of what's expected of them? Are the numbers easily accessible within the right dashboards in the right location? Is there a consistent rhythm of one-to-ones, team meetings, forecasting, right? So that operating system has to exist. The two things that I would place on top of that then to help support the intrinsic motivation of the people are clarity of vision and effective communication. So why do I say that? I think those two things, when done well, drive loyalty. And I've seen, especially during my time at Wayflyer, that if you have reps who feel loyalty to a founder, co-founders, CROs, heads of sales, they will show up in those meetings and they will have those numbers there. They will fight on that last 2 days of the month or the last 2 days of the quarter. And I think you drive loyalty through two things, which I said: effective communication. So as a CRO, as a head of sales, what is your internal communication strategy? How are you showing up? How are you visible? How are you communicating change? How are you communicating recognition and success? How are you showcasing the work of others? And I think we put a lot of pressure on management to play that role, and they should. But as a CRO, as a head of sales, you play a massive role in that, and it starts at the top. And so that is a big one. And then clarity of vision. I mean, if you are a head of sales or a CRO in a startup, scale-up, scrappy organization, crikey, clarity is probably something you don't have a lot of because things are changing so quickly. But you have to put a marker out. You have to set some form of goal or vision in the table. And even if it slightly moves or it kind of twists in the wind a bit, you know, Dan O'Brien, former CRO at Wayflyer, did that impeccably. He put a goal out. He said, we want X number. We're working towards that by the end of the year. And we're going to all feel like this. We're going to be celebrating this. And he put the marker out and he consistently drove that in. And so, and let's talk about how that touches intrinsic motivators. If someone on your team wants to be stretched or challenged, that goal needs to be pretty far-fetched and they need to feel like, my God, I'm going to push for that. If someone on your team is hyper-competitive, that's going to help them. If someone on your team just likes to feel like they're validated or valued, your effective comms is going to serve that. So two things done well can hit pretty much every intrinsic motivator in a team.
I think it's a great point because so often when we hear from revenue leaders, we hear about the mechanics of a go-to-market. You know, we hear about data, we hear about tech stack, we hear about people strategies, enablement strategies, we hear about process, particularly at the moment. And rarely do we hear about, you know, proactively designing internal communication strategies. And rarely do we talk, you know, you do hear about clarity of vision, but maybe what you don't hear about is how that is managed as things inevitably go right and inevitably go wrong. You mentioned Dan O'Brien there. Yeah. Give us an example of how Dan managed that well. I'm sure he'd appreciate the call out as well.
Do you know what? Dan just showed up. And I think that sounds so silly when I say it and so obvious for anyone who's listening. But, you know, in the last week of every month in Wayflyer, because it was monthly targets, Dan would be on every stand-up. He'd be messaging reps individually, asking how he could help them with deals that were in the final stages. I think there's a lot to be said for just showing up. And I think, look, if you're listening and you're in one of the bigger tech orgs, it's a little bit more challenging, right? Because you're in a much bigger machine. But when you're in a startup and a scale-up, I don't think you can underestimate that. Massive loyalty. If you're a rep and you're in your third or fourth month ramping and you've only done 2 deals or 3 deals and you're trying to hit your fourth and you're 20% off target and there's 2 days to go and the CRO is messaging you saying, I see you're doing this, like, how can I get it? Like, you'll go to bat for that guy, right? So I think it's just about showing up.
You spent a couple of years in Salesforce.
I did.
So after you caught the startup bug, you then went the other route into a behemoth.
Yeah, chalk and cheese.
Yeah. Firstly, tell us why. And then not only tell us why the change in company size, but why enablement? So
let's answer why enablement first. When when I was at Waxman, I had to hire really effective communications professionals. In 2016, there was no comms people who also knew blockchain. That human didn't exist in the world. So we had to hire really effective communications people. What I didn't realize at the time was I spent most of my 4 years there training really effective comms people to be technology experts. But not just technology experts, but knowing how to use their understanding of technology to consult, advise, pitch to journalists. So suddenly, without even realizing at the time, a lot of my role was enablement. And so when I left Waxman and I took a career break, took a lovely year off, got married, learned to drive, didn't do my test, but learned to drive, important note there, and did lots of other exciting things. I studied organizational psychology, I became a qualified coach. And when I started to think about what I wanted to do next, I then came across the concept of enablement. And I loved it because I didn't necessarily see myself going into learning and development or the more the HR world, but I loved the data-driven business and impact side of enablement. And I wanted to go learn from the best. I wanted to understand the creme de la creme. And at the time, Salesforce was, this huge revenue engine, and had a really strong brand within the industry. And I was very fortunate to get an opportunity to go in there. But I was a very unique hire. Most enablement professionals, they've either been BDR, AE, CS rep, or they've done some form of SaaS experience. I had none of that. I was so left field. But actually, I think that's been one of the most impactful parts of my career journey next, because I think I view enablement very different than the normal enabler out there. And I think it's contributed to my success as an enablement professional. So I went into Salesforce. I learned how they operate, how they run programs, how they craft enablement strategies. And I paired that with my commercial acumen of running a startup and brought that to my career to follow.
So on your perspective on enablement, we ran a dinner last year for senior enablement professionals, and I do a lot of work with enablement professionals myself. And I have two very different experiences. One is where the enablement leader has a seat at the table and has a direct impact or influence on important initiatives that move the needle and drive revenue. The other is that an enablement leader doesn't have a seat at the table and at times can be reduced to running tactical sessions or can be running initiatives that are not given the level of priority that maybe they should be. Mm-hmm. How do you think about the role of enablement and what really good enablement looks like?
I think the most effective enablement leaders are chief of staffs to CROs. So I consider myself now, and in my enablement role at Wayflyer, I consider myself like a personal trainer to any CRO or head of sales or head of CS. And so what I mean by that is if you know that you want to improve an aspect of your physical appearance or your fitness, you can either go to the gym yourself and hustle and hope it works, or you can go elicit the support of someone who is an expert in that field. And so you go to your personal trainer and you turn around and you say, look, here's where I want to get to. This is my goal. And they're going to help figure out, well, why haven't you gotten there yet? What part of how you're doing things currently isn't working? And they craft a plan for you. And I think the same thing needs to go for an enablement leader. But for that to happen, they need to be working within a revenue function. They can't be on the periphery. And many of them are, right? And so if you're a CRO or a head of sales or someone within a senior leadership role here and go to market, you need to ask yourself that question. If you want enablement to be effective, are you creating a place for them to understand your challenges, your goals, what you're working towards, right? That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I'd say, that makes an enablement leader stand out, and it's definitely something that I'm seeing more and more now running my own enablement business. A lot of enablement launches and never lands. It doesn't stick. It's another thing that we're throwing into the ether at reps. And if you think again like a personal trainer, the reason you're going to them is an accountability partner. The reason you're going to them is because if things aren't working, they're going to pivot and they're going to rewrite the plan for you. So many enablement functions exist as, oh, close rate's down. Okay, I'm going to roll out a program that I have in my back pocket that's worked before, and I'm going to just see if it sticks, and then I'll move on to the next problem as it happens. And that isn't going to work anymore. And I think especially if you're in a startup and a scale-up environment, it doesn't work. But you have to give enablement a seat at the table in order to give them a chance for this to work.
So let's talk about effective enablement. We're going to use you as an example, right? So you arrive in Wayflyer in 2022. it was the day or the week that they closed their
Series
Series
B.
B.
Yeah.
So Wayflyer at this stage is up and running 3 years, and they've just achieved $1.6 billion valuation. They've just taken on $150 million in funding. You walk in the door to be the director of enablement. Firstly, what do you find?
So for me, Wayflyer is the tale of two stories. So the year I got there when they raised their Series B, it was all about ramping. So my job in that first year was how fast can we get people to ramp and onboard? And we were ramping in the US, in Dublin and in Sydney. And so my first year was decreasing time to productivity, which not many people out there love ramping and onboarding. Love it. If anyone out there needs a good ramp strategy, plug, I am your gal. I love ramping. The second year then, we had worked on ramp and we were hiring, and we were slowing down hiring a little bit at that point, and we were looking to drive efficiency. That was the same time that a lot of layoffs were happening in tech in general, and a lot of businesses out there were realizing, wait a second, I'm going to not be able to grow my business, but I have to make the people better within it. And we spotted that we'd spent so much time ramping reps that we were assuming that our existing team members had a structure, had a methodology, and were succeeding at that. Myself and my team spotted there's no sales methodology at Wayflyer. We haven't locked this down, and because of that, even the best reps were not supercharging their success. So the second story of Wayflyer was, how do we increase close rate? How do we increase all funnel metrics? And the way to do that was bringing in a sales methodology and MEDDIC as a deal framework, and that's where I gave Ross Keating a ring, and suddenly we were partnering for that whole year, which was incredible. And I learned a lot from you in that whole experience as well. But what I certainly learned was it takes a village to transform an organization like that. But people hear the word sales methodology and they freak out because they're like, this is going to be this hyper complex, complicated process. We're going to have to change everything. And it's like, no, it's change management. You're communicating a structure that's going to drive success for your team and simplify it. And so, yeah, we worked together for that year. So they're my two stories of Wayflyer, my ramping and my funnel metric impact through solution selling.
Yeah, certainly my experience, I suppose, with any organization that is in that level of hyper growth is that, one, you have to have really smart people in the business, which Wayflyer did. And secondly, that if a business scales that fast, it just simply can't grow structure or infrastructure at the same rate at which it's growing. So there was that need to go in and implement a new methodology or a new framework. So we spent probably 6 or 9 months doing that initial rollout. What do you think we as a group did well to make that stick?
Two things I think we did really well. The first is, this was not an enablement project. This was a go-to-market change. This was a go-to-market shift. This was a go-to-market strategy. And I think we did a really well job of bringing everyone within the business in, that it was not the enablement team wants to roll out something. And instead it was sales, customer success, and all supporting functions with RevOps and enablement want to see change within the business, and we're going to do this together. And I think that was a big piece. And the second thing I think we did really well is we just got results fast. I remember we were seeing reps close deal after deal after deal at a pace that they had not seen before because they implemented some. And I think we were really quick to spot results, and we were really quick to get those results in front of every other rep and say, hey, this could be you too. And I think that's a critical part of change management. It's like quick wins, show the wins, and drive momentum through that. And I think there were two things that we did, together really, really well. And you were such a critical part of that, and your team, because one of the things that's hard about enablement is, like, to some extent, there was some things we were rolling out with solution selling that we probably said the year before. But there's bringing in partners, and there's bringing in people who are known within the industry to be experts in this and seeing the impact they can have with you. So I think that was really, really good.
I mean, for what it's worth, I think what went really well, and perhaps comes back to some of the things you said earlier around clarity of vision, there was a really clear strategy set out internally on your side around what you were trying to achieve within the organization. And then there was really clear structure built around that. So not only around, the more tactical training itself, but there was real clarity around things like CRM changes, around the role of leadership, around the messaging and positioning, and also how that pertains specifically to Wayflyer, which isn't a typical SaaS process. And then there was hopefully good delivery, right? But there was always the right people in the room as well to engage with the training, and there was a really good attitude in the room as well. So I learned a lot doing that. I think another thing that was really, really well done was some of the things that seemed more tactical around adoption, right? So I remember walking into the Wayflyer office, and every time I walked in, there was a medic dashboard on the screen, right? Or every time I went to a kickoff, like medic was front and center, and there was a Slack channel with medic wins going in, a number of times a day. So even if you wanted to get away from it, you couldn't. But it was done in a way that really showcased how people were accelerating their deals, how numbers were accelerating, how skills were accelerating, and that messaging really came through in a very strong way. And as an external coming in, was really cool to see that it became the go-to-market language in the organization, right? It became not only part of skills and deal execution, became the forecasting language, or it became the language for how you analyze your skills or your quarter.
But I think you've just summarised what effective enablement is. People think enablement is a training. If we had just partnered and said Ross and I were going to come in and Ross and the team are going to now roll these trainings out, it's the fact that through our work together, we mapped a movement. And I think enablement has to be seen as movements or shifts in an organisation, not singular programs that are tactical. It does not work.
So you had a lot of success in Wayflyer, but you then decided to embark on another journey of starting your own business. So firstly, tell us about why you decided to go out on your own, and then tell us about how it's gone.
So I think I always knew I would. I was one of those people who knew I would start a business but never knew what it was going to be on. And then I spotted during my time at Wayflyer that what if I could have the success I've had here, but what if I could do it for a lot of different businesses? And I don't think there was many people offering enablement as a service. So I started Walker&Co, hyper original name, I know. January 2024. So I'm 2 and a bit years in. Before I kind of share what's going well, I think there's a couple of things that happened at the time that kind of pushed me towards it. One, I had built enough sophistication within the enablement org within Wayflyer that I knew I was leaving it in a place where I could step away and I could then replicate and do it for other organizations. And two, fun story. I remember meeting you. I don't know if you remember it, but we went for coffee about 2 months before I made the decision. And I was like, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think, Ross? And you said to me, if I had €1 for every person that comes to me and says they're going to start a business, Emma, and they never do. And so I went home and I was like, start my business. Proving Ross wrong. And then 2 months later, I'm ringing you and saying, guess what? I just incorporated. So it was always in me. I always knew I would. I knew I'd done what I needed to do at Wayflyer. And then I just needed someone to tip me over the edge a little bit. And that coffee definitely inspired me. What's gone well? Well, first of all, I'm so happy. Do you know that? And like, sometimes we talk a lot about like, well, I've done this. And I have hustled, but I'm just really happy. I feel good waking up in the morning. I feel really good at the end of every week knowing I've worked well for my clients. But a couple of things stand out. Ramping is one of my main services I offer. And I feel very lucky and fortunate that I've been able to go into organizations now from Series C all the way down to kind of Series A level. And I've been able to impact time to productivity. I think we have a lot of organizations around the world who are not ramping reps properly. We're hiring, maybe we're firing. It's not good for culture. And so I've managed to successfully do that now for a number of organizations. And secondly, I'm building a brand as a coach for emerging leaders. And I love that. So if you're someone who either runs a team of future leaders or current leaders, or if you're a leader yourself here thinking you want to get better, I really enjoy supporting people to be the better manager, better leader they can be.
So let's talk about AI within that context, right? So you have had a look under the hood of lots of fantastic organizations in hypergrowth over the last number of years, and you're doing a lot of work with leaders. What is the role of leadership becoming in the AI era?
So first of all, I would say that I'm not an AI expert, but I am someone who is an expert in driving change within organizations. And I think ultimately the AI movement is change management for the foreseeable. I think there's two ways in which it's changing the role of leadership. One, change architects. Leaders now need to be people who understand how to successfully introduce, enable, and drive adoption of repeatable habits using new technology. And I think a lot of management are not equipped to do that or don't realize how important that role is. And then the second thing as well, I would say, is that leaders, we've always known leaders need to be emotionally intelligent. But wow, like now it's even more important than ever. And this could be a weird answer to this question because I don't think a lot of people are thinking about it. But I'm seeing a lot of chaos around AI. I'm seeing a lot of excitement, but excitement meets not fear, but apprehension over, am I adopting things enough? Am I moving quickly enough within reps? And I think if you're a leader, you have to be self-regulated. I think you have to be self-aware. I think you have to decide how you show up in a time of technological change. And I think you have to have the emotional intelligence to build a calm, collected approach to how a team is going to navigate and succeed using AI. And I'm seeing a lot of management struggle with that. They're jumping on trends, they're sending people articles of things to try, and we're creating so much noise that we're lacking a clear strategy around AI amongst the noise. And management have to be able to do those two things: change architect and increase your emotional intelligence, because you're going to create change fatigue, chaos, fear, hyper emotiveness within your team, and none of that is conducive to performance. So they're the first two things that maybe if you asked another person that might be a very different answer, but that's what I see as two really critical parts of leadership.
So take us to the first one there, right? The change architect.
Yeah.
Take us to a first line or a second line manager who is thinking about improving AI adoption within his or her team. What are the things they should be thinking about?
Yeah, I love this question. So the first thing is, there's no point sitting down as a first line manager and saying, I'm going to craft an AI strategy on a Notion page and I'm going to present it to my team tomorrow, because the strategy is going to change every single day. So what I recommend you do is you create a small mini strategy based on 3 buckets. You should have a bucket called should use AI. So what are the things that are easily executed upon, that we know work, that your reps should use AI for? Have 3 or 4 things. The next bucket should be you could use AI for. So there could be a couple of things that you're saying, do you know what, let's try it out. Let's test it. Let's figure it out. And then there's going to be a bucket of we will use AI for, but we're just not there. So when we go back to that piece earlier about, how do you create a performance culture? That's clarity of vision. I'm giving clarity. Hey, everyone on this team, no matter how good you are at AI or not, we should be doing this. Anyone here who feels a little bit more confident with AI, I'd like you to help me on the coulds. Move on to the next bucket. Try this, try that, give me feedback, test it out. And if anyone here is feeling particularly confident and excited by AI, help me figure out the will. So that's the first recommendation I would give to anyone here. The second one then is, how do you be a change architect over the shoulds? So if there's 3 or 4 things we know they should be doing, maybe we want them using, an AI-driven intent signal, maybe some like ample market to be driving, do X, lead prioritization and supporting with, intent signals. Maybe we want them using an AI-driven call recording software that's going to help them with like feedback and scoring and coaching. There's a couple of different things. Maybe they're in the should. As a leader, I would go to my team and say, here's the 2 or 3 expectations that I have. Here's the 2 or 3 enablement resources to help you. And here's how our operating system as a team is going to change to make sure we're all following this. And my communication will be repetitive around that. And so I suppose that's the starting point here. But a lot of leaders don't realize that they have to paint the map and the vision before they can even go and start doing that.
So that was going to be my next question. So what are some of the mistakes that you see at the moment, or what should leaders not be doing that's maybe creating some of that chaos?
We can't be putting it too much on reps or all on reps to be figuring out how AI forms part of their plan. And I think it's a massive trickle-down effect, because if you're a CRO, it's most likely that your CEO has gone to multiple events, meeting multiple investors, and is being told AI needs to be a huge part of your business. So the CRO has been given a mandate that they need to now have this. CRO then goes to their, and it trickles down to the point where it gets to first-line managers, and managers are like, I need an AI strategy, and then we're saying, help me reps figure this out. And I think what is happening for me, or that I'm seeing, is that the gap is widening between great reps and good reps because of AI. Great reps in the past would have been those that are hitting consistent attainment, trying a couple of new things, but they're really strong and steady. Now a great rep is doing that, but they're also navigating by themselves and figuring out how AI is going to drive their success. Good reps are those that are struggling to figure that out. And I think we're placing a lot on reps at the moment to figure it out for us. And it needs to be a partnership. So as a manager, one of the mistakes I would recommend you don't make is coming with no plan, but expecting the plan to be given to you by a rep. A manager needs to have some level of clarity of vision so a rep can meet them halfway. And so that's the key main mistake I'm seeing.
And I suppose that in some way starts to feed into the second point, which is the emotional intelligence piece, right? So big part of leadership is about understanding yourself, and as you said, being intentional with getting to know your team. But what does that mean in the AI era that we're in?
I think in the AI era we have to understand a couple of new competencies or skills that are emerging as really important with reps. So the first one that comes to mind is what we call learning acumen. So how quickly can someone identify and see something they need to grasp quite quickly, understand it, and then input it into their world? In the world of AI, reps' abilities to have really strong learning acumen is incredibly important. So if a manager is hyper emotionally intelligent and understands their team, they will be going out and looking at their reps within their group and say, which ones am I already seeing have this learning acumen and which don't? And those that have the learning acumen, my one-to-one with them be shifting. It would be continue with the average typical agenda items on a one-to-one, but I'd be reserving a portion around, I've seen you adopt X, Y, and Z. What else are you thinking AI can do for you? How are you navigating that? Or, hey, do you mind if I challenge and push you a little bit? I've seen you're already doing our shoulds. I think there's a couple of things in the could bucket that I want you to start testing, and here's how. But another emotionally intelligent manager would recognize that there's going to be some people in their team that don't have that learning acumen yet, or they haven't built that skill. And so going and actually pushing them to be trialing and testing AI is going to potentially drive too much chaos within that. And we first need to make sure that we're starting small. So that's why having that should, could, and will buckets are so important, because that grouping might not be the people that are going to help you craft the future. They're just the ones that need a little bit more hand-holding now. And so it starts with knowing, do my team have learning acumen, and who does? And of those that do, shifting your coaching approach. And of those that don't, it's hand-holding and supporting and not driving chaos and not driving fear. And it's been like, do you know what? Let's just start small and simple and see what works for you. And that's an easy way to think about it.
Brilliant. Emma Walker, thanks for joining us.
You are so welcome.